Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you, and we have a wonderful presentation this morning. I think many of you are familiar with the League of Women Voters in Washtenaw County, and our speaker this morning is Margaret Leary. Margaret is the person who's the presentation coordinator of the League of Women Voters here in Washtenaw County, and we have a renowned, I know we have other people in our audience today who are League of Women Voters members. Anybody want to raise their hand? Yes, wonderful, wonderful. It's a great organization, really important. And Margaret, our speaker for today, had been the director of the University of Michigan Law Library, and I think it was during that time, is that right, Margaret, that you wrote a very interesting sounding book? I'm going to give you the title of this book for anyone interested in the law library. It's called Giving It All Away, the story of William W. Cook and his Michigan Law Quadrangle. So I looked it up, and I thought it sounded intriguing, so maybe Margaret will say a word or two about it. So please join me in welcoming Margaret as she talks about voting rights in 2024 today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Before I start, I want to tell you about a connection that I have. I was going to say with all of you, but I would really say it's with this. This building that we are in, this addition to your church, was designed by an architect named Ralph Hammett. And Ralph Hammett designed the house that I now own. So if you'd ever, I actually have a talk about Ralph Hammett if you would like to know more about him. He seemed to really like designing additions to churches. And going around town and finding out more about that, I realized that that's what he did. I think he might have designed the Lutheran church that's on Stadium Boulevard, but I'm not positive. Anyway, that's a connection that the two of us have. Before I start talking about new voting rights, I want to point out the handout I gave you that says Voter Information 2024. That is, for one thing, a summary, or at least the most important points of what I will talk about today. But secondly, down at the bottom it says Vote 411. How many of you know about that? Okay, because only a few hands went up, I'm going to say a little bit more about it. Vote 411 is what the League of Women Voters of Washtenaw County has prepared for you so that you can know more about the people who are running for office. Last night, in about 10 or 15 minutes, I was able to figure out exactly who I wanted to vote for the Ann Arbor Public School Board. I didn't know any of the names when I first looked at it, but I was able to tell from the answers the candidates had given to the questions from the League, which people I felt comfortable voting for. So I recommend that to you. So now I would like to start talking about Michigan's new voting rights. The League, let me just say the background about the League. The League of Women Voters is nonpartisan, which means that we neither support nor oppose political parties or political candidates. However, we do study issues and take positions on pending legislation or ballot proposals. And the example that I like to use is that the League was one of the several organizations that managed to get the voters to approve a constitutional amendment that created an independent Citizens Redistricting Commission, which took that power to draw election districts away from the state legislature and put it in the hands of a 13-person board that was balanced between Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And that is the group that drew the lines, redrew the lines for congressional districts and also for the state house and the state senate. The end result was that after 40 years of being just about the most gerrymandered state in the country, Michigan went in 2022 to not be like that anymore. And the election in 22 resulted in a state senate and a state legislature that more accurately reflected the fact that Michigan is very closely divided between Ds and Rs. And there are a couple more Ds in both our state house and our state senate, but with the election this fall, that could change. So that is an example of the kind of policy that the League pays attention to. Okay, now I want to do something that I don't need to do for this audience, is to show you how your vote matters. This is your right. And we added this slide when we realized that sometimes we give this presentation to audiences where the local clerk has told us the percentage of people who vote is much smaller than the percentage of people in that precinct who are registered. And so we added this. I know all of you don't really need this. So this is what I am going to talk about today, new voting rights. I'm going to talk about the ones that are in boldface on this slide. Early voting, the permanent mail ballot list, improvements to absentee ballot voting, and also voter identification. These were added with Proposal 2 in 2022, and it was approved by over 60% of the votes. So this is something that people really wanted. And at this point, I'd like to add something that most people don't know. Michigan is one of only about 14 states where the voters, without the legislature interfering by either undoing it or saying it can't even start, where the voters can modify their state constitution. And that's how we got the redistricting commission, and that's how we've made these newer improvements to voting rights. And it is a real blessing that we in Michigan have a power that most of the 36 other states don't have. It's not that they don't have the power at all, it's that the power they have is often limited to only certain small areas of the Constitution or is subject to legislative approval, and that's not the case here. This is a challenge. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the first big improvement to early voting. Have any of you voted early, say in the primary? Few people have. Oh, great. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I think it will make a real difference. And by early voting, I mean, sorry, I'm just not good at this. Okay. Where will it occur? At least 9 consecutive days, beginning on the second Saturday before the election and ending on the Sunday before the election. For at least 8 hours a day, voters may vote at early voting sites. These are different from your regular polling place. That's an important thing to know. It will be a different place. In Ann Arbor, there are 3, and one of them is at City Hall, and the other 3 are at AADL sites. And the location, days, and hours of each early voting site are different in each community, but in Ann Arbor, they are at the places that I just named. And I will show you a little bit more about this in a minute. Wait, I'm very sorry. Shoot. Okay, I need to go back a little. No, I'm going the wrong way. Okay, this is where you can do early voting in Ann Arbor. And as I said, they are the libraries, and during big elections like this November, there will be 2 on the campus. And each one has to be there for 8 hours a day. You might wonder about being able to vote early in person previously, and before this passed, you could do that, but you had to go to your clerk's office to do it, to vote early in person. And this is different because it's in many different locations and for 9 consecutive days. Then you might wonder what is happening in the rest of the county. And the county has a coordinated plan. And this slide shows it. I'm sorry, I can't see very well what you see. Can you see all of this pretty well? Yes. Okay. What they decided was that 4 cities and townships have established their own early voting plan, and this slide shows it. The yellow is Ann Arbor, the purple is Ypsi Township, the green down at the bottom is Bridgewater Township, and you might not be able to see it, but down at the bottom there's a little red thing. That's Milan. It's tiny. Why does Milan want to do it on their own? You'd think they'd want to be part of the county plan, right? Milan is not only small, it's in 2 different counties, Washtenaw and Monroe, and the 2 counties have different kinds of voting machines. So when Milan said, we want to do our own, everybody else said, wonderful, go to it, have fun, hope you do well. Okay, so now go on, and what this slide also shows is that these 4 that I just named that are doing it themselves have about 165,000 voters, and then all the rest, the 22 cities and townships that joined the county coordinated early voting plan have about 156,000 voters. So that work balances out pretty well. Darn. I don't want to. Okay, so I showed you, did I show you Ann Arbor? I'm sorry. Okay, so Ann Arbor, there are 2 places this fall on campus, and then the other places are used when there's not such a large election, for example, in August. This slide shows where all of those will be in November. The next, I've somehow gotten, go back. Okay, this shows early voting in Washtenaw County, which I just talked about. And where it will occur is an early voting site, not your election day site. And that is important to know. And it will occur for 9 consecutive days. I've already gone over that. And the elections that will have this include sorry. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about early voting versus another option, which is absentee voting. Okay, and the next 2 slides show comparisons between early voting and absentee voting, and I think this is something that all of you understand. Early voting you do in person and you vote in a place. Absentee voting, you get your ballot ahead of time and at home and can take your time to figure out how you want to vote, and then return it a number of different ways. You can take it to a ballot drop box, you can mail it, or, and this is new, you can take your completed absentee ballot to an early voting or election day voting and actually put that, after you check in to the voting site, you can actually put that through the tabulator yourself. So if you want all the advantages of doing your research at home when you fill out your absent ballot, then you can have the pleasure of making sure that it goes into the tabulator so that it will be counted, although there are other ways that you can return it. And this shows what I just said, the differences between the two. One of the things we now have is a permanent mail ballot list. And this might be something that some of you would want to do. I'll say a little bit about it. This did not exist before. Before, you always had to request an absentee ballot. It would be sent to you, and then you would vote it. Now you can have the right to sign up to receive this absentee ballot rather than just an application before each election. And this shows who can do it, and this means that you would receive this ballot for every election. This does not happen automatically to anyone to get put on the permanent absentee ballot list. You have to ask for it. You have to ask to join it. And this is how it works. If you move within the state of Michigan, you remain on the list, but you have to update your voter registration address. And if you move outside of Michigan, you have to surrender your driver's license, and then you will be taken off the Michigan voters list. If you'll be away from home during the election season, you can request that your ballot be sent to a different address. Now, the permanent list is an improvement, but I want to say one thing about it. It's tempting to get on the permanent list because then you don't have to think to ask for it every time. However, the problem is that if you decide you've gotten on the permanent list and all of a sudden one year you decide that in November you'd rather be with your grandkids in Texas or Florida or wherever, if you do that, you will go to the post office, right? And you'll change your address for the time when you're gone, so your first-class mail will go to you. That will not take care of your permanent absentee ballot getting sent to you. Because, and you'll be happy to hear this, the Postal Service, yes, it will forward first-class mail, but it will not forward a ballot. And this is good to know because we hear misperceptions about absentee ballots, and the Postal Service will not forward them. So if you do go down south just for one voting season, one November, what you should do is change at your Postal Service to get your first-class mail transferred. But then if you want the clerk to send your absent ballot to that different address, you have to go to your clerk and say, this year I want you to send it to the other place. And the only reason I'm telling you all this is I think you might know some people who do this, and I think it's important to know you can change your address to get your ballot changed, but you have to change it with your clerk, not just with the Postal Service. So here are some improvements that have been made to absentee ballot. First of all, the state is funding the postage on all of it, and so you don't need to worry about that, finding a stamp. There is one great big issue with absent ballots that I want to point out on this slide. I'm sure you all know about this, but you see what's in yellow and circled in red here is a place for you to sign. This is the outside envelope into which you put your voted absentee ballot. You have to sign this outside envelope. And it also has a place for you to put the date. And I suggest that you add the date there too, just in case. I saw a lawsuit in another state recently where people had been signing this for, it's not Michigan, it's a different state. And when they didn't put the date in, people were arguing that that ballot shouldn't get counted. So just to be safe, I don't know about that happening in Michigan, but just to be safe, I suggest that you do that. Okay. Here is another new piece. You're now going to be able to track your ballot better. And this will be done by your clerk. And the Ann Arbor clerk has been very good at this. This has been being done for, I don't know, several months, maybe a year in Ann Arbor. But you will get your absentee ballot tracking They will tell you when they sent it out. They will tell you when they received it back. And if there are any issues with it, the Constitution of the state of Michigan now requires that your clerk tell you there's a problem, tell you what the problem is, and tell you how to fix the problem. So if you forget to sign that outside ballot envelope, the clerk will get in touch with you and say you forgot to sign it and tell you how to fix that. And I'm not sure exactly how they would tell you to fix it. They might say come down and sign it. They might say we'll mail it back to you. But they will have to tell you that. And you also now have an option to sign up to receive all this information through texts or emails. So the next improvement is that you'll be able to track your absentee ballot application at a very important website, which is on this slide. It's mi.gov/vote. That is the second handout that I gave you. The first handout I gave you says voter information 2024. Then there's a one-pager. This one-pager is something I created so that it would be easier to let people know how much information you can get just by going to mi.gov/vote. And the first thing you have to do is put your name in, which is the very first item. I think it's in red on this handout. And then the rest of the handout is my attempt to show you the range of information you can get from going to that website. The first thing you do is put in your name, your address, and the year you were born. Now don't worry, the Secretary of State already has that information. You had to provide that, for example, to get your driver's license. So after you do that, you can then see all the other things that are listed on that handout. You can find that information about yourself. So that is, I think, a really, really good feature. Okay, so you can track it, and you can see the example here on the slide. Now, what about an absentee ballot? How quickly do you have to get it in? You have to get it to the clerk, and what I always say here is at 8:00 p.m., not 8:01, but 8:00. Get it to the clerk. You can put it in the drop box. There are many drop boxes around the city. That applies to everybody here. If you're a military or overseas, you have the time that's shown here, 6 days within the election. And the deadline is 8 o'clock. Now, the one place where you can put them is in drop boxes. Been a lot of misunderstandings, misconceptions about drop boxes. But now we have the right to at least one secure ballot drop box in your city or township. And what the drop boxes are, this is a picture of one in the upper right corner. This is where you can return completed absentee ballot applications and the voted absentee ballot. These are secure, they're locked, and they're bolted down, and they're designed to prevent the removal of ballots and applications except by authorized election officials. Some are subject to video surveillance. The picture here isn't really very big, but I'm sure you've seen them. They are very, very solid, and it is nearly impossible to get anything out of them. I don't know if you've noticed, the Postal Service has improved some of their drop boxes, like the one on Stadium Boulevard. You now get to open your door and stand because you can't put the envelope. I see smiles. They have added one on Stadium that is easy to use from the car, but otherwise you have to get out of your car because you have to just put it like that. And I think the drop boxes for our ballots inspired the Postal Service to have these better drop boxes. Starting in January 2026, all drop boxes will have to have video surveillance. And there is also a requirement that more drop boxes be added so that there's at least one for every 15,000 registered voters. And the clerks have to put them in locations that are convenient and accessible. And I think This is how to find your drop boxes. That's the same website, mi.gov/vote. And then here, for your convenience, is a list of where they all are in Ann Arbor. City Hall is only, the one in City Hall is only open when City Hall is open. All the others are available starting now through Election Day. And of course, you can always put them in the mail if you would prefer. This is a reminder about drop boxes. You can't use just any drop box. You have to use a drop box that's in the city where you vote. So if you go over, if you live in Ann Arbor and you vote in Ann Arbor and you go over to Ypsi to have dinner at the sidetrack, and when you park the car, you see there's a drop box, and you think, good, I'll drop it in. Don't do that. I know from meeting with the clerks, and the league actually has a whole section of our members whose job it is to maintain connections with the clerks, but I know that the clerks take it very seriously to help people vote. And some clerks have told me, this was a clerk actually in Milan, who said during the presentation like this one, that if there's something wrong with someone's ballot, they just drive it over to the person's house and tell them how to fix it. I don't mean after they've opened it up and looked at it. I mean when they get the envelope in the mail, if the person hasn't signed the outside of the envelope, they'll just drive over to their house and say, please sign it, and then they'll take it back. I'm not saying you can count on that anywhere. I'm just saying that's how dedicated the clerks are. Okay, let's see what's next. Voter identification. This is interesting because I'm sure you've read about voter identification being a way that voters can be discouraged. So here is the story in Michigan. I just love this one because I know how much photo ID has been used in other states to make it hard for people to vote. Here, you're in Michigan, you'll be asked to show a photo ID when you arrive to vote. And if you have one, show it. You should show it. You must show it. If you don't have it, you can still vote. You have to file, the slide says a simple form, and then it tells you what it's called, an affidavit of voter not in possession of picture ID. Well, it's a simple form with a long name, but you simply sign this affidavit and you will be allowed to vote. Now, what kinds of ID are acceptable? And this is a list of them. For the driver's license, it could be current or expired. And I think this slide says the rest pretty well. This is important because in many states, this is what is used to prevent people from voting. Now, this provision is now, because of what the voters approved in 2022, this is now in our state constitution. This has always been the law, a statute, but it's never been in the Constitution before, and that makes it harder, next to impossible, for the legislature to change if the voters don't approve of what they are doing. There are many reasons a voter may be without an acceptable ID. Maybe they couldn't afford getting it. Maybe they don't have access to transportation to get one. Maybe they left it at home. Maybe they lost it. And that should not be a reason for someone to be denied the right to vote. What happens is you sign that affidavit, and then as they check you in, they make sure that you are listed on the list of registered voters, and eventually that affidavit that you would sign to say that you don't have it with you, your signature on that affidavit is then compared in the clerk's office to make sure that that was the right person. So there are ways to ensure that that's okay. This next slide, I don't really need to say anything about. We have an election on November 5th. And this is the league's recommendation for some of the places you can go to get voter information. My favorite one is the top one that says mi.gov/vote. That's the one that I've given you, the one-page handout that lists most of the information that you can get there, so you know how much is there. This is the most comprehensive information that's available for all things voting related, especially for getting information tailored to your name, your address, and the year of your birth. This is the one represented by the one-page handout that I gave you, and it is an excellent source. And of course, the MichiganVoting.org is a good site, and the third one is the LWV Washtenaw site, which is good for many, many things, but in terms of voting, I would recommend mi.gov/vote. So I know this was a lot of information for you to take in, and so I would love to answer any questions you have or comments you have on what I said. Yes, and I will come over there so everybody can hear.
It's not a question, but I am still working with Ann Arbor Public Schools, and as a retired person, I know personally from the executive assistant through the superintendent who you should be voting for the Board of Ed. If anyone would like to take a picture of this, I'd be happy to have you do that.
That had nothing to do with the League of Women Voters. I'm serious. We do not support or oppose candidates. It's fine for you to say that. I'm just saying that's not coming from the League. And I think people will appreciate that.
I should just say it out loud. I still don't know what's to keep people from voting early and often.
The question was, what is to prevent people from voting early and often? You can't vote until there's a place to vote. So as to the early part, you can't vote until the first day of early voting, which is 9 days of early voting. So that's the when. What prevents people from voting more than once, I probably do not know all the parts to that answer, but the main part to the answer is that all of these records are computerized. And when you go to vote, whether you go to vote by asking for an absentee ballot or whether you go to vote by voting in person, they check to make sure that you're registered. And when they do that, they also make a note in that record that you've been given a ballot and to vote. They also can keep track of whether that ballot actually got filled out and put into the tabulator. Once they know that, they won't let you vote again. You can't, because they have a record that you voted and they have the ability to know that that went into the tabulator. Is that responsive? No, they all have, at the places where you vote in person and in the clerk's office where they handle the absentee ballots, all those workers have access to all the records of everybody. And so no matter where you vote, that will be recorded in that central database. Does that help? You mean I hope it's accurate. I've worked as a paid worker in 3 elections, and from what I've observed, that works. People can't get a second ballot after they voted once because there's a record that they've cast a ballot already. Yeah, sure. And it would be difficult for somebody to be able to get that second ballot one way or another because they do have a record of someone receiving a ballot and then that ballot being returned. Did I see? Yes.
Can they do, excuse me, can they do early counting of absentee ballots in Michigan?
No, they can't. Right, they wait until all the, I think the new rules give them a little leeway in doing some of the checking ahead, but they don't open them up and count them until they're counting all the ballots.
Voters registered as having voted.
Oh, yeah, yes, yes. Other questions? Yes. Wait, most candidates. What the league does is they find out everybody who's running, and other league members who know more, please correct me or add to what I have to say. But they know, can you ask your question again so I'm sure that I answer it correctly? Right. What it does. It has all the candidates, but it's up to the candidate what they answer. So we give them all a chance to fill it out, and we publish what they say. If there's a spelling error, it stays. If there's a grammatical error, it stays. If there's a factual error, it stays. What you see is what the candidate wrote, not what the league said. Betty? Yes, yes.
That's the problem. I think that's what you were getting at.
Yeah.
If the candidate doesn't send the form back, they get a couple of reminders, please do it by the deadline. If they don't, and some of them don't, they just did not return form.
Yeah, but the name is there. There's just nothing for you to read.
No information.
Is that responsive?
Yeah.
Good. Other questions? Yes. Well, I don't know what you were reading. The fact is that non-citizens can't vote. People are claiming that that is true, and it's possible that it's happened a very, very few times, but it's not enough to influence the outcome of an election, and it's really very rare. It's in our Constitution that only citizens can vote. There have been occasions, and I think Arizona is a state where this happened, where for a certain period of time, for a few years, maybe 10 or 20 years ago, that particular state did not keep a record of how they knew that somebody who registered to vote was a citizen. And the question arose whether those people who'd been voting for the last 20 years would be able to vote this year. And after the courts looked into that, they decided that it was all right, that the reason that information got lost wasn't that they were trying to vote when they weren't citizens, but that the state had lost track of the records. So they were allowed to vote this time. But in general, you have to be a citizen to vote. And in general, when you register to vote, the clerk is required to know that you are a citizen. And in states, states may vary in the way they can find that out, but they do. When this came up more recently, I thought, let's see, what did I do to register to vote? Well, I won't tell you how long ago that was, but I have no idea what I had to show. I suspect it might have been a birth certificate. That's the most common way to prove that you're a citizen. Or if you became a citizen after you moved here from another country, there will be a court record of that you can have with you or that can be looked up to show that you became a citizen even though you weren't born here. Is that responsive to? Yes.
Well, I'm just wondering, because it seems like there have been a couple questions about voter fraud, and I don't know if you're able to speak to this, but do you know how many cases of prosecutable voter fraud there have been in Michigan in recent elections?
I'm aware of claims that there have been that, but I'm not aware of any decision that concluded that that had happened. And that is true and I can't remember how many cases concerning the 2020 election were brought in Michigan. There were a lot, though, and every single one of them failed. Yeah. Other? Yes?
Could you say a word about the efforts to eliminate the Electoral College?
I have a talk about that. And thank you for reminding me to tell you about it. It is called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. An interstate compact is an agreement among some states, not all states, that the states will do something all the same with each other. And the best example here is the Great Lakes Interstate Compact, which is not only all the states that border the Great Lakes, but the 2 Canadian provinces that border the Great Lakes. And it basically is an agreement that limits the ability to extract water from the Great Lakes to only those states that are on the Great Lakes, and only those communities that are within a certain distance, and I can't remember if it's 20 miles, it's not very far, to take water out of the Great Lakes. So this other interstate compact, which is called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, I'd be happy to come back and talk about it, and it's before the Michigan legislature now. It probably won't get passed this year because after 40 years of gerrymandering, there's a long list of things that need to be done. I think this is on it, however, and that would provide, the interstate compact would have to be signed by the state legislature, approved by the state legislature. And the state legislatures, when the state legislatures in enough states that add up to 270, which is how many electoral college votes you have to be elected president, because that's slightly over half of 538, which is how many electoral college votes there are in the country as a whole. When there are enough to add up to 270, those states, but only when there are enough that add up to 270. And right now, it's up to, I'll just roughly say 250 electoral college votes. So it's getting there, but it's not there yet. When there are 270 electoral college votes from the states that have passed this interstate compact, those states are required by their each state's law to use the national popular vote to assign their electoral college votes, not the votes in the state. Right now, all the states say our electoral college votes all go to the person who won in my state. Michigan has that. So it happens to all the people who voted for the other person. Their votes are just gone. So that's what that is, and I do have a talk about that, but that's the gist of what it says. I have to say, the first time I heard a talk about the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, it was at a state League of Women Voters meeting, and one of our very best presenters, Sue Smith, who's in Ann Arbor, gave the talk, and I thought I understood it perfectly. And I turned to the woman next to me, I said, boy, that's a really exciting idea. And she said, yeah, but what about, and she asked me question 1, question 2, I couldn't answer any of her questions. And I don't know why it's hard to understand now that I understand it. I don't know why everybody can't understand it easily, but it took me a couple times of listening and reading about it. But thank you for asking about it, that's important. Yes? I'm sorry, could you say that a little louder?
I think that states have defaulted on compacts before, so I wonder what's to keep them from doing it.
The proposal itself is very small print, about 1 1/4 regular pages, so it's not super long. And it does have a provision in it that a state cannot, so each interstate compact can have its own provisions for how states can leave it and what happens if the conditions under which they can leave it. And for this one, the conditions are several, and they include not dropping from it very shortly after they've adopted it, so there's a time period. And the major requirement is that they can't withdraw within a certain time before a presidential election. And I don't remember what that time period is, but it's something like 6 or 12 months, so that it wouldn't be done just to influence, it couldn't be done just to influence a particular presidential election. But thank you for asking. That's a great question. Yes.
My question is about getting more information about the city, the proposals that will be specific to the city. So it looks like on the 411 site, as you were saying, if you wanted to get more information about somebody's running for the school board, what you're going to have access to is their personal statement.
Correct.
And then it looks like the proposals are listed in the language that they will be on the ballot.
Yes.
I'm wondering if not that source, what would be a good resource to find good information pro and con on those specific city votes?
There are 4 in Ann Arbor, A, B, C, and D. I can't tell you about A and B. They are both, I believe, renewals of millages for particular purposes. C and D, the Ann Arbor chapter of the League of Women Voters of Michigan, of Washtenaw County, has studied C and D, and one of my colleagues is giving a talk about this right now at a different church in Ann Arbor. And the League is not in support of either C or D. And if you go to our website, you can find a good statement. You'll find a press release that was issued, written by our president, and then you will find a longer document that's about 17 pages long. And I also have a short presentation that I could give about that, but I can't give it off the top of my head right now. But the League does not support either C or D. Our board formed a committee several weeks ago that looked into that, and they consulted with people who were supporters of it and people who were opposed to C and D. And after they studied it, they decided that they could not support either C or D. They are each ideas, I should say, that have been passed in many, if not most, cities in Michigan. There's one of them, I can't remember which one, where Ann Arbor and Ypsi are the only cities that haven't adopted a different way. Yeah?
That's C,
C, right.
the nonpartisan.
Right, nonpartisan elections. So you could go to the League's website and see what the League says about C and D. Yeah, thank you for asking. That's a great question. Any other questions? Well, thank you very, very much. I so appreciate you.
Thank you very much. We'll look forward to our next contemporary issues.